We're coming up on the hour, and people are showing up. This is a nice group here. Okay, so couple of questions to get out of the way right away. I'll probably be repeating this. The first is that, yes, we are recording this. So not to worry. You will receive the recording access automatically. There's nothing you have to do. So that's good. And the other thing is your questions are very welcome during the webinar. My suggestion is always to write down the question right away that's in your head. And the reason is people tend to have that question stuck in their mind, and then you're thinking about it. It's distracting for most people to have that question. So, and the other thing is, if you're like me, and if you forget to ask the question, then you're like, what was I going to ask? So just write it down right away. So you'll notice in GoToMeeting, if you kind of go to the bottom, there's a questions interface. Just type there, and you should be good. All right. So I presume everybody can see my screen and all that. We're going to start. People are showing up. I'm just going to repeat. There is a recording. You'll get it automatically. I'll probably repeat that later on as well. Okay. So special guest with me is Milen Epik. Milen was just very recently, as in Monday, joined us as our VP of Globalization Solutions and Services. It's a really important role in Lingoport, and to some degree, it's carrying on. Those of you who have been following Lingoport a while know that Lori has run services for Lingoport since 2003, so a long time. She just retired, right? Isn't that cool? She's remaining in the back of scenes to help us out, but Milen is actually taking us into kind of a new perspective, because Milen's skills also include a whole lot of localization technologies and helping companies with a large localization initiative. So I'll just mention that. A little bit about us, Lingoport, is that we've been around for a long time. Anybody who's new to us, we've been performing internationalization services efforts since 2001, when I started the company on the kitchen table. And the funny thing is, with COVID, we're sort of back to the kitchen table, all of us. But in any case, we've been doing the hybrid office thing. That's a lot of history. It means we've seen a lot. Now, of course, people know us for our software. We have a whole software suite. And that, in fact, is where Lingoport does most of its business. But we still perform a whole bunch of services. It's actually been, that services team has been growing again, especially since coming out of the pandemic. There's been a new emphasis on bug fixing for i18n services, internationalization, conversions or implementations as well. You know, those could be pretty large scale, as well as just even localization, sort of positioning and consulting that we've been performing. So that's why we get to give these webinars. We just have all this experience. And oddly enough, when you perform a lot of globalization around software, you learn where the software gaps. And so that's where a lot of our software development came out of, is seeing, kind of painful gaps in software development. Now, just another little word about Milen, who's on with me. Milen is having trouble with her webcam, but Milen, if you could say hello again.
Yes, hello. I hope you can hear me. I've been trying to turn on my camera on and off, but it's just black for some reason. I have joined on Monday. I had no problem with camera, but I guess on the WebEx right now I have an issue. I'm super excited to join Adam. And Adam was talking about my new role. So in addition to looking for internationalization solutions, what we want to bring to Lingoport is kind of a larger view of where you as a company are going. Because if you're internationalizing, it's because you want to localize down the road. So we don't want to do it in isolation. We want to keep an eye on where it is you're trying to go and help you not just look at one bucket, one area. We want to also help you transition after internationalization to the localization. We want to do it continuous. So there's a lot of conversations in this day and age with everything being continuous integration, continuous development, continuous internationalization, continuous localization, that we do need that larger view. So back to you, Adam.
Very good, very good. Okay. The other interesting thing is that Milen and Lingoport have worked together actually on a number of occasions over the past history, so we knew each other pretty well. All right, so on to the internationalization experience. All right, so first of all, I'm going to give just a little bit of basic information to help the conversation. You know, if you're localizing, you've got to internationalize. Now, there was, like in the bad old days, like I'm talking in the 90s, even early 90s, people used to sometimes actually make a copy of their code and literally replace strings in the software, and there'd be the Japanese version and the French version, and that was terrible because now you have like, you know, basically an octopus of code that you have to support, and it's terrible. So that argument that you don't have to internationalize, I just want to put it to bed right now. It's a dead argument. Nobody does that anymore. Like once every few years, somebody will say to me, hey, we just want to replace the strings with Chinese. And it's like, no, you don't want to do that. But it's so rare that people ask me for that now that it's really nice. And I have to say the whole market understanding of globalization is so much better now than 5 years ago, than 10 years ago, and certainly better than 20 years ago. So we have that going for it. But still, there are people that think that internationalization, globalization is just about strings, and it's really not. Strings are the visible part that you see. So obviously strings are very important, but literally every significant software application, be it on in a web browser, be it on a phone, or even on a console, all of it has inputs of data that, you know, either is coming from the user or some other source. It manages that data. It transforms it in some way, maybe performs some math, some sorting, whatever it may be. But there's lots of that happens, and then it returns that information. And so if you think of that as, you know, sort of like a cycle, that is going to have various bottlenecks and issues that can cause trouble. And, you know, you see that if you ever fire up, you know, sometimes you'll get an email and you'll see little square boxes for content. The apostrophe is sort of famous for that. Those are actually character encoding issues that some bottleneck is happening, or some lack of font support, or something along those lines. But those are literally a representation of internationalization issues, and they're very common. And if you are in charge of localization, and as I look through the titles of who's attending this, there's a lot of you out there. You can't be in charge of your quality until you're in charge of your internationalization, and that presents sort of a gap and some tension that happens within an organization. It's important to impart upon your development groups that when we talk about globalization, we're actually talking about a locale, not just a language. So example of what I mean is here in the United States, where we're having this broadcast from, we speak English. In the UK, they also speak English, but they speak a variant of English. So their locale is going to be different. Their forms of measurement could be different. You'll see, of course, I picked the UK where they still sometimes use miles, but let's say they're using kilometers. Date format can be different. Address formats can be different in different markets. Say in Canada, you have a postal code versus zip code. All these things have to be taken into account within the frameworks of your application. And often, one of the things that we see, and this is why it's not just strings, is someone will be using, say, a calendar class, but not passing locale into the calendar class. And so then you just basically get some default, which may or may not be okay. The other thing is that I'm just going to emphasize quickly is that business logic can be very different in different markets, and that has to be sort of looked at from a requirement standpoint. In some cases, what you may be doing may be illegal because of GDPR or just inappropriate. Let's say you have healthcare software and some format of it is no longer applicable in, say, the Netherlands or wherever. You have to think about those constraints also. So this webinar is not intended to be like an internationalization tutorial. I'll come back to this, but I do suggest you go to the Lingoport blog and in the search window, just type in gremlins, and you'll see lots of past webinar information on a webinar called i18n gremlins. And when we talk about gremlins, we're talking about i18n bugs. So that's a really good high-level primer on all the issues you have to deal with. But the basics are you have, besides locale selection, which is like sort of the having a locale framework, and you'll need different locale frameworks for different parts of your application, different programming languages and the like. You do have strings, concatenations. I give an example here. It's the famous sentence, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. I really just took this and gave it an example. Like you could have a variable which is an amount. Now you have a variable with a color, a variable with pluralization, and another descriptor, and then finally a dog here. Those of you who are around language know that the word order can be very, very different. And those, so it's not just externalizing strings. These concatenations can kind of peer out because, think about it, concatenation is really efficient programming. And so developers actually learn, here's how you build a string. If you go on a Java tutorial or something, it'll teach you about the concat function right away. And, people say, well, why aren't we, why do developers still do this? Well, because concatenating is very normal programming, method. So you have to almost unteach your developers to do things. There are methods, functions, and classes that are going to be different for every programming language. By the way, this is just sort of a small cut of a globalizer dashboard, and you can see one of the things we look for are these locale sensitive methods. These will be different depending upon the programming language, very different in some cases. There's different flavors of JavaScript as also, which is really common in a UI that will have Java embedded in it and all kinds of things, Go, TypeScript, whatever it may be. But they're all going to have their own locale sensitive methods, functions, classes. We have this term called general patterns. Think of it this way. It's very easy for a developer to hard code in a font in a presentation and be actually even normal. That font may not resolve well in, say, Japanese or Chinese or whatever your target language is. So you want to look for that as a pattern in the programming that somebody has chosen, say, Arial or whatever it may be. for a certain font, and now the character is going to look too small in a complex, if it's a complex character. So these are all things that we look for. A static file might be a video or a legal document, or any sort of thing, an image. And then third-party products. And I have to say, third-party products years ago used to give us real trouble on internationalization efforts, because sometimes like somebody would have some, spreadsheet third-party product or something like that that didn't support Unicode. That has become really an exception rather than a freak out these days. You still have to look at them. Almost everybody uses third-party products in the creation or building blocks of their software. But so you have to like sort of have a look at it, but they're not the blockers that they once were. All right. Now, there's a few different business cases, right? I've never internationalized before, or we're pretty internationalized, but we have all these bugs. We're going to first look at we've never internationalized before, because that's a big, scary monster, okay? If you've never internationalized before, there are some things that really get people stuck. Number one, it's expensive. When people think about it, they know if you've got, say, a million-line application, when I speak of lines, I speak of how many lines in the source code. A million would not be that unusual for a popular application, at least 500,000. We're working on one right now. It's 8 million lines of code. Another one with 23 million lines of code. So these things can get really large. And anytime you're going to unpin what you've got, and you've got years of development time, and now you're going to stick in locale and all these internationalization conditions and requirements, there's risk, and there's money, and there's time. And chances are no organization has developers just sitting on their hands with nothing to do. There's a whole long feature roadmap, and internationalization wasn't on it until recently, right? It tends to be time-sensitive internationalization. A lot can go wrong. The cost of not internationalizing or doing it wrongly also is, it really weighs on organizations. If you do it wrong, well, you just entered in a market with something that's, kind of buggy and crappy, and now you're going to have to overcome that if you do it wrong. If you didn't internationalize, well, you're always going to carry that cost with you. It's never going to go away. And in extreme cases, we've actually seen companies go under because they didn't internationalize. That's an extreme condition, but certainly it's a limit. If you're just using U.S. English, U.S. measurements everywhere, you're going to maybe get early adopters worldwide, but eventually somebody's going to eat your lunch. That's just how it is. People internationalize for a few reasons, and you as a localization manager need to keep those in mind. The first one is somebody sold something, right? That produces a panic. Somebody sold something is my least favorite reason why you should internationalize. You might say, hey, Adam, why would you say that? That puts an onus on them to internationalize really quickly and hire your teams and all that. Well, the reason is that reason goes away rather quickly. Sales can go sideways very quickly. Client relationship can go away quickly, and now you don't have a commitment to globalization going forward. The next one I like a lot, strategic initiative. That happens when, hey, investors, the CEO, or somebody from high up says, hey, we really need to expand into these markets. Lots of really good examples. This is a favorite way in my mind, because the company's saying, hey, we are going to think like a global company. We're taking off in a new way. It's a very cool thing. Lastly, and this is great for business, is a company that's already global buys another, through M&A acquisition, goes ahead and buys another company and says, oh my God, we're a global company. This product only works in US English. Fix it now, right? that's really good for business. It happens a surprising amount of time. But always throughout all of this, no matter what your business case is, I'm going to state the obvious. Your developers have other product objectives, and globalization is just one competing thing. So you better toot your horn about why it's important, because they're not going to implicitly understand that. All right, so I promised some stories for this webinar, and I'm a little remiss because Milen and I have some stories together. I didn't put any of those on here, so I'm going to exit out of the show and go. I went to one property that we internationalized together a few years ago. But anyway, I'm stealing my own thunder. So in this case, NASDAQ called us up, and they had been talking with us about how strategically they wanted to internationalize this one product. And little do people know, you see NASDAQ on your phone, it reports like what the NASDAQ stocks are doing. You probably didn't know this, but they actually are also a software provider. So they have all these member companies, and they provide these platforms that help these member companies run themselves. And one of them is this thing called Director's Desk, which is used to log for Sarbanes-Oxley and other requirements, to log various board meetings and board initiatives and the like, and it's called Director's Desk. And what happened is I got a call, and I personally got the call from one of the senior executives at NASDAQ that said, you know how we've been talking about internationalization? What can you do for me in 3 months? And they had a pretty serious application. And this is what you don't want to hear if you're developing software. 3 months is like barely enough time. Like when you think about putting up test directives and testing and validating what you're doing, 3 months is just not a long time. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think of when I ask companies, like, I know you test for features, but what if you had to test for the whole application? How long would that take, right? I used to sometimes reverse time when I was doing it like sort of from the hip, based on that metric, like times that by 3 to just even get started, right? So 3 months is a terrible amount of time, but these things happen, right? And you've got to help your customers through that. And so in that kind of thing, you want to think of a multi-phased release plan. And in fact, you always want to think of a multi-phased release plan. That's sort of like a better, agile way to take things on. But in this case, we did meet that deadline, and what we decided was core functionality, in this case, that had to be delivered in Spanish. And it was a lot riding on it for NASDAQ, because like if they didn't, they'd be in violation of their contract. So that was like the most blatant somebody sold something case I can think of. In this case, it was a turnkey delivery where Lingoport did everything. I generally don't suggest that. I really like hybrid work. So hybrid means that Lingoport is providing a few engineers and a bunch of technology, but there are stakeholders at the company in the development department that are also part of the project. And what does happen when you have a hybrid is you have a team at the customer, but they are always subject to the emergency du jour. And what I mean is, like, if something is going wrong, chances are the people that are put on the i18n effort are actually pretty senior. They understand while all the bodies are buried in their source code. So they tend to be more senior people that can really help in terms of scope issues, in terms of functionality issues, because, hey, when we drop into an application, naturally, we don't know how everything works. So we need somebody senior on the customer side to help us, right? Those people are really, really important, but they also get pulled into things. So their time is a little harder to schedule. Another project, go ahead.
Another reason why I always find that it is so good to work together is that typically your developers on your side, customer side for us, are the ones who know their code and technology the best. But internationalization specialists from Lingoport or whoever is an internationalization specialist, know the internationalization discipline and requirements and most effective way to apply internationalization. So now if you take the best of the two worlds and you have them working together, they can accomplish a lot very fast. And then there is also cross-pollination for the internationalization team to learn about your product, to help faster on other parts when these senior people are busy with something else, and they will also learn for the future and just develop code that is internationalized from the get-go.
Very good, very good. By the way, somebody put in a not so much a question, but a statement that I just looked at. And we're going to get to some of that very shortly. It's like showing the visibility within your organization of internationalization. So just this that is on my screen right now. Thank you, Milen. Is a case of a really multi-headed sort of application that involved a whole lot of hardware, software, and everything. It was an extensive effort. If you go into Lingoport's blog and you search on telepresence, you'll actually see a white paper on that effort and the like. It's a while back, but it was really a noteworthy effort. We were pretty proud of it. It was very, very difficult. Clearly a case where it was really important to have good contacts over at the client company where we work together. Databases are also often really good places to look to get help from the client, because often the DBA is extremely protective of the database administration. All right. Lastly, that I had on this screen was CA Rally. There's a webinar on this project also. If you just type in actually Agile Central, the product was called Agile Central at that time that we did the internationalization. It was called Rally, then Agile Central. Now it's called Rally again, but it's an agile planning system, cloud-based. They had a really heavy emphasis on test-driven development, which is a common development philosophy. There was a lot of Git action going on. Definitely, what I mean by test-driven is that you develop the tests first before you even write code. You plan those out so that you always have a way to verify what you're writing, and that's kind of really important. Another example I have here is Thomson Reuters ScholarOne. That was another hybrid effort. We had a couple of developers from their team, particularly on the database and the like. I'm going to also, bring up one product. I just went to their website this morning. This is Iron Planet. This is a project we worked on with Milen and when she worked at translations.com a bunch of years ago. I told you Milen was a very known quality for us. And you can see that this is a really interesting one just from a market perspective. This is an auction site, ironplanet.com, that's used to sell big iron, bulldozers, anything large and yellow. It's usually yellow, not always. And they internationalized, not so much to get into other markets, although they wanted to be in Mexico and some other areas. But what they found when they talked to their users, that a great deal of them wanted to be able to actually search in Spanish in particular. And they, as soon as we turned on Spanish, as soon as we were like finishing phases of internationalization, they said that 20% of their visitors were choosing Spanish. And I was happy to see that still, an obvious choice for them. So even though at the time they didn't even have that much of an export plan, they were thinking within the US, there are market opportunities that would be happier in other languages. So that's cool. At this point, they've actually expanded to other regions, but you can see they don't even have a whole lot of language, but that is there for them. It's there as they want to expand. So that was just, sort of a cool thing. All right, where am I? I have to go
Well,
back.
of course, I remember that. I mean, this was, of course, one that went was very, very smooth, and we had a lot of love and appreciation with our contact there, constantly measuring the increase of business after they had internationalized and localized. So we were getting graphs for a while. Oh, now that we went into this language, our business has grown by, I don't remember really the metrics, but it was like at the end of the second month, something like 2 times as much, and then more and more. And of course, at some point it starts flattening and you just need to add new markets. But yeah.
You know, for the localization side, people on this call, and there's a few of you, I remember a conversation with Jeff Fairbanks, who was the salesperson on this
Yes.
for translations.com. And he said to me, man, it's internationalization. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Because he kept getting more localization work out of it from the client. So it was good for him. All right. Very good, Milen. All right. So we want to talk about the anatomy of a project, right? So they all kind of start the same way with some business overarching need, and they kind of take. You might think of, a lot of times there's a tendency to think of this as like a really mechanical thing. And to some degree, once the project is moving along, it gets that way. But early on, there really has to be an emphasis on requirements. I sort of mentioned that earlier. What business case is most important? There's scoping that comes out of that. What's the 80% of functionality that's important might be the first thing that you take on. What limits of different markets do you have to think about? What are the technology requirements and limitations that are already in place? Code-based clarity is really important, because I will tell you that almost every company has what I'll call dirty laundry in their code base, stuff that maybe should have been retired, or stuff they're not particularly proud of, but it works. This is a good time to rethink some of that. Also, it's the minority of cases, but it does happen. Sometimes there's a lot of dead code in the application. And when you're coming into an internationalization project, you really want to identify dead code. What I mean is like code that's been sunsetted, it's not even used in the application, but nobody cleaned it up. So it still exists within the repositories. And people are sometimes afraid to clean it up because they don't know what'll happen, right? But it's bad housekeeping. And, most people will recognize that they really shouldn't do that. But it's there. You really don't want to internationalize dead code, because it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of money and resources and all that. It comes up a surprising amount of time. And sometimes with like applications that, you would think are really, really locked down, and they even underpin parts of the internet. I'm talking about like applications that are used to manage, transactions on the internet. That has happened within our clientele, where it's like, whoa, half of their code is dead, and this is what's running shopping carts around the world. That was amazing when that happened. That's a few years ago on a project, but it does still happen, and it's actually even happening now for one of our clients where it's an issue. One of our secret sauces is that we have this globalizer product. Many of you probably have heard of it. It goes through source code and it identifies issues. I showed a little piece of a dashboard, but if you can imagine, before you go into a project, you can actually count internationalization issues and build metrics around that about how you're going to approach them. That's very powerful, because unlike a lot of other development projects, going into internationalization, somebody is always going to say, well, how much is this going to cost? And that is a very waterfall look at things, but it's a market reality. People will be like, I know this is going to be a big deal. I know this is going to take time. What do I need to budget for that? And so Globalizer is really helpful because it gives us actually a picture of like what's going on in the code. It gives us enough granularity that we can actually build a plan with a high degree of accuracy and common tasks that we know will go around these things. And from those tasks, we can extrapolate, hey, this is how it's going to go. Now, during a project, you start to move into a more agile rather than, like a big waterfall plan. You start to move into a more agile approach. And you also have lots of code merge. Remember, nobody is sitting on their hands while you internationalize. So you have to oversee internationalization that's going on in new functionality, not just the old. And so Globalizer helps that happen because it automatically checks code as it's being developed. So you have this sort of parity going on between the teams and code merge activities and the like. But when you bring it together, you're not creating, you're sort of not working with a leaky bucket where new internationalization issues are happening all the time. It's the normal phases, milestones, code merging I mentioned, and then it comes to continuous testing. And this is something, even if you've got a really good internationalization programming going on, continuous testing is something that I see a lot of organizations fall down on in localization. Often they don't really have the feedback loop to the developers until localization has happened. And that's kind of bad. That breaks a basic principle of agile development, which is developers need to be able to see and demonstrate their required functionality. If localization is part of that, you need to have an automated system that does that for you. All of our products will deliver that. There's also some really cool QA stuff that we can deliver so you're in parity with development. So you're not like developing, sending off strings, they come back, let's say you're really fast and they come back 3 days later. You're still behind where the developers are at. You're always playing catch up. So we have systems that help you. So you're always on the same cadence as the development team, as long as you're enabled to do so. Bugs are kind of like really a big deal, and sometimes we're hired literally just to fix bugs. There is this friction that's probably obvious to many of the attendees that naturally happens. Maybe your organization is awesome and it doesn't exist, but I'll tell you that it's really common that there's a friction between the developers and the localization teams. There's a technical credibility gap that I see in most localization departments. The developers have their world and their language and their group of tools, and localization tends to be focused on, localization-oriented tools and processes and linguists and the like. And the two really can have trouble. In a way, you're both close to what you do, but too far apart on many issues. And, people will say, oh, well, we're logging these bugs in Jira. And I will tell you from years of observing that Jira and other bug tracking systems are basically where i18n bugs go to die. And there's a real reason for that. When you have, say, an error with plural handling or something like that, again, the developer doesn't see it till much later. So it's reported, it goes into a queue, and a project manager or product manager or somebody along those lines says, hey, we're going to weigh these bugs in terms of priority. And often a localization bug will be a lower priority in terms of the whole application than a functional bug. Now, it's functional, literally, for the localization team, but it's not for the product manager. They're like, well, the software doesn't crash, I'm okay. The function actually works, but it's not great. Yeah, I get that it doesn't work great in this language. Okay, we'll log that as a bug. And it stays a bug because nobody in the development team who sees that bug knows where that bug exists in the code base. And that's painful. So imagine you're a developer, you're going off and you're delivering this new feature and somebody says, go fix this bug. that you don't even know how to recreate because you don't speak whatever language that is where that happens. So maybe you have a screenshot of the bug. Still, having that screenshot, source code is not so well organized so that, oh, I know that this screen relates to this line of code or this repository. It's just doesn't really work like that. And so untangling that for the developer is kind of a pain, and it's sort of expensive and distracting. So one of the things we sometimes do is we go after those bugs because we have Globalizer. Software companies will keep Globalizer to go after those bugs, but what we hope they are doing is continuously solving those bugs. Remember, it's a really old axiom of management is like what gets measured improves. So if you're measuring internationalization issues with Globalizer, your stuff, your localization issues are just going to start cleaning up because so many of them are around internationalization. And in this little picture, this is an actual customer. I've referenced them in other webinars because they're really good about letting us show their stuff. What you see there is a pseudo-localized interface. So as their developers are working, Localizer, in their case, you can do it with Globalizer, but it's really automated with Localizer, always pseudo-localizes whatever they're working on. So if they're working on some new screen or something on the mobile or whatever, the developers have immediate feedback. They know that, first of all, if there's a problem with the character encoding, they'll see some little square box or gibberish or whatever. There's a beginning and end pad to these strings you can see here with the open brackets. That tells them that the interface is expanding appropriate for them. But they can also read it. They don't have to be a language expert to actually see it. This is a really simple methodology, but all too often, companies will wait to some golden moment to pseudo-localize. It should always be turned on. Developers should always see what their applications are going to look like if that's an important market, if globalization is going to be important to them. So,
and Adam, if I can just add a little bit on the prior slide, as part of that credibility gap, this relates to an earlier point you made about needing to have a global initiative. So the mindset of the company of how one treats globalization is very important. So JIRA is where the i18n go to die. That is correct. And also, I think just to expand on what you were saying, there is a classification of the bugs. And from a technical perspective, if you are a software engineer, oh yeah, this doesn't affect everybody, the software still runs, it's not important, is what you said. But the classification of even the bugs should be different when you are considering yourself as a global company and you have a globalization initiative. You might think your software is running, but then again, the message could be so wrong. I mean, it could be, you might think it's a small issue, the truncation example I gave you the other day. Some languages, because they have word order differences, such as Turkish, for example, a word can be truncated at the very end, and the last syllable of that whole phrase is the not, the negative. Like, don't press the back arrow. And it's press the back arrow not. So press the back arrow might be what they see. And then they do the wrong thing and you have all sorts of problems. Yeah, it's a small truncation issue. It seems to be okay. No, it's not, because the whole classification should be different. So yeah, this also is related to the measuring that you're talking about. So with Globalizer, you can measure it from a globalization perspective, and you get a list of all of your bugs that can be acted on immediately.
Great, thank you. Good example with the back button. Okay, so there's a few ways, you know, that you know, in terms of like ongoing internationalization that are, you know, like possible for you. That you know, I mentioned measuring everything. Our industry, in terms of any kind of continuous process, actually has a lot to learn from. I like to look at the security initiatives. I follow security companies because they have faced a lot of the issues that globalization is really just kind of paying. We've been doing this for a lot of years, but the whole industry is kind of catching up in terms of accepting this. The term continuous localization has become a normal part of the vernacular. We've been talking about it like since 2005, but it's really, being accepted as what you want to do. You don't want, like people to be manually exporting strings into a Excel sheet and that sort of thing. Although it's still the way a lot of localization, like it's amazing. Like that's still the way I'd say that the bulk of localization happens these days. Still, it blows me away. But people know they should be doing it continuously. Well, security and bug checking software have been doing that since like the early 90s. So they have fought a lot of battles that we're just really getting into now. If you look at products like Coverity, for instance, a lot of resistance to that product around the early thousands, for good, sometimes for really good reasons, right? But it slowed down the path of development. But it was really important to managers because they wanted to find these bugs early, right? So you had this battle, and now it's like, it's normal. Of course we scan for security, right? But that took place. That was a thing that had to change with senior directors, right? So the idea is really important that if you want to change development, you have to raise visibility in the way that developers work. So security did that. They raised their visibility as an issue, not, oh, we're going to fix security issues later because there was some kind of bad news that got people in the news, for some security breach. They were going to try to head that off and stop it early. So they needed to make things visible during the development process for people to see what the problem is and not wait till testing. And it's the same case for globalization, although you won't get in the news because of a broken encoding or a truncated word or the wrong translation. It still affects you as a localization manager. So the way that you raise visibility is you get into the flow of how people do their work, how developers do their work. And you have to keep, sort of evangelizing why this is important, shouldn't be ignored. So this is a case of where IDE is an interactive development environment. That's the Trados for developers. So basically that's where they work, right? So we make it so that they can run a quick globalizer scan. Let's say a developer writes 100 lines of code. Before they submit it, they go ahead and they run a quick scan of globalizer, and maybe they see an issue, right? And you can see they see it in the report below, they see it in the code, they can now act on it. They can even get help on that issue if they have a question. You want to scan for issues. GitHub in particular calls things a pull request. That's what did the developer work on, right? So right away they see, oh, I worked on this. Right away, I'm going to look at the pull request and I'm going to run globalizer in the background. So if I don't do the right thing and run it in my IDE, I still have a report of what's going on for internationalization. And I can quickly correct that because, again, I'm not dealing with thousands to millions of lines of code. I'm dealing with just what I'm working on right now. It's a very manageable segment. That's the way to get it done, not after the fact. Now, we do provide dashboards for after the fact, but I never feel like that's the way forward. The way forward is literally right in the work that people do. The other thing is like super common, and not every localization person realizes this. It is a statement of the obvious for many of you that developers are always undergoing code reviews. They write some code, and then sometimes the person sitting right next to them has a fresh pair of eyes and looks at it for coding quality issues. internationalization reports should be part of that coding quality, because again, the faster, the closer you are to the creation of the code, the easier it's going to be to fix those issues. So, whoops, looks like I duplicated a screen. All right. So again, seeing is believing. There is truly continuous localization also possible nowadays. Pseudo localization, I mentioned, it's always on. Consider this is something really new, and it's only made possible by our in context QA products that we have at Lingoport. The idea is that if you can quickly correct a translation using our in context QA software, and you can go to our website and read about that. But basically, it lets a developer or linguist like navigate the application and correct the translation right in line. They don't have to import it, or they don't have to do anything, right? They don't have to have a workbench. They can just go to it and see something and fix it. There's a workflow around that approval process, but that is kind of revolutionary, and it's made possible because all of Lingoport software is actually mapping out where the strings are, where everything is in the source code. So we have a direct tunnel back to where that string exists. So I gave another webinar about it, I think in the fall. So you can search on that, localizer QA. But anyway, the idea is, why not plug in MT? It's like the nightmare of every localization person, because the developer comes to them and says, well, why don't we just use, why don't we just use Google Translate? And the localization manager kind of rolls their eyes. And I'm saying, yeah, why not? Because if you can correct it quickly, then you really have something. And in fact, we've integrated with some TMSs in a way where we help retranslate those Google Translate or Amazon Translate or Microsoft, or there's a whole bunch of engines, even custom engines that we support. But the idea is, this is a little novel and scary for companies. Why not always have a translated version of your software available? The idea is not just pseudo localization, but the developer could actually navigate to say, let me see what this actually looks like in Chinese, or whatever target you're looking at. Localization no longer has that 3 to 5 day, sometimes 2 week turnaround on projects. Remember, sometimes even if you're continuous, you might save up localization efforts because you kind of want to have enough words aggregate, and you want to avoid minimums. So if you're using machine translation, you don't care about that anymore. And the machine translation is so cheap that, kind of be free, right? But then you spend the time to have a subject matter expertise go through your application in a QA perspective. But the idea is the developer gets what they want. They have a continuous system that's always updating translation. That's what they're used to. That's literally their expectation. It's like, wait, what do you mean? I have to wait till the translations come back? So that I'm on my high horse there, but that's where I actually see the industry going. All right, so trouble ahead. What do you got to worry about? And then we'll kind of wrap this up for questions. I'm already running late. Developers will say, aren't we already internationalized? That should be a warning sign across your bow if you're in localization. Of course they're internationalized. Are they necessarily internationalized tomorrow? Maybe not. We've seen companies come to us that have considerable drift in their internationalization efforts. Some of these companies are really well known software consumer-based companies that still have drift all the time because they're always hiring new developers. People write stuff. They're not actually checking the code for internationalization issues as they go. So yeah, they're internationalized, but just how you would say at one point of time, our application is secure, it passes our security tests. That doesn't mean you stop checking that it passes security. So again, take that as a nugget. Use security as a benchmark for you, as an argument to bring forward to development teams. It's complicated. There are all kinds of internationalization issues. They're really not obvious to teams. You have also things that are, kind of like really out there and wild. We didn't really talk about this, but your localization files, your resource files, whatever they may be, you might have JSON, YAML, super common files, but the file format is not really well established. So you'll have different groups with all different interpretations of here's the file format for our localization files. Those need to be automated. The transforms need to be automated so they can go and be performed and managed by a TMS. That's something that our software does. And it's something that's very configurable, but you'll almost never herd those cats. So you need to have some automation unless you want to have a developer, sort of designated to, sort of do those file transforms for people. And that's sort of a thankless, time crunch job that can be error prone and introduce new problems, right? And finally, localization by spreadsheet needs to die. We don't want to turn our developers into clerks. And keep in mind, there's always going to be resistance to any new initiative. I like this cartoon and I use it all the time, just because it's so true. Developers are really busy, right? They have features to deliver. They'll be like, we're too busy. We're going to continue to do things in this awful process. We know we talked about how we want automation, but we're not going to take the half an hour to onboard a set of repositories because we're too busy right now. It's like, it's crazy, but it's literally the logic that you should be prepared for. We're going to invent our own way. I see this all the time. And then I come back to companies a year later, 2 years, and either they haven't invented their own way or they invented their own way and they're running into the limitations because they decided their own way to handle strings. And it doesn't work with anybody's tools out there. And somebody has to transform whatever they did into something usable by the translation companies. This happens a lot, and it's really dumb. But I hope I'm not insulting anybody here, but it happens freaking all the time. Companies will say things like, we're going to create one repository that will be used for all of our product strings. That never works. Companies do it. They might have limited success with it, but once they're scaling and their applications build out, remember microservices, really popular these days. That means you're going to have a lot of repositories with different functionality that plugs in and plays into how an application works. Having one repository with all your strings is just like a terribly onerous thing, but people do it thinking like, oh, well, it's simple. I won't have to search anymore. Well, searching through your repositories for changes in strings should be automated. It's one of the critical functions of localizer. So go away, we're too busy. You just got to fight through that. Somebody in here wrote a question about talking about showing examples. This is something I just saw yesterday on LinkedIn and I just had to throw in. Now I can't read this script on the right. But basically, the point is that somebody was working in one script and suddenly another script came up within their UI. Now, to the developer, the untrained eye, it all looks the same, but it's a really understandable thing. And what I guess, I don't know, but what I guess is what happened is somebody was cutting and pasting from a spreadsheet and just didn't realize it because they don't speak the target languages. Any human process introduces a danger of delay plus mistakes. So again, humans versus machines. If you've got a repeatable process like what has changed in this resource file, send what has changed, that should be done by a machine. Broken code and fire drills is no good. Sometimes localization introduces breaks, let's say a curly bracket gets omitted or anything. You need to have a gate process that says, hey, there's a duplicate key in here. There's a broken file format in here. We're not going to stick this back in the code, or we're not going to pull it out of the code until this critical issue gets fixed. Those are the kind of things that our software does. But it's important, whether you use our software or not, that you have these quality gates that will, without them, can introduce new bugs into the software, and that gets the finger pointed at localization. What you should be going for is making localization really just like electricity. Nobody thinks about electricity. It's just a service that's delivered when you flick the light switch on, or in some cases, just move into a room and the motion detector sees you. That's how you want to think of localization. It's so automated that none of the developers really have to bother with it, right? Because it's just corrected as they go. All right, so a lot of these things, remember, poor translations of the old QA method, they're really onerous to fix. The old QA method is, hey, I'm going to file a bug with a screenshot. I'm going to have an approval process. Somebody has to now track down where the string exists. There may be multiple examples of the same string. I've got to find that. I've got to fix that. It's terrible, right? Localizer QA solves that problem. All right, so if you're in a global, ambitious organization, the best ones really celebrate it. They make it part of the DNA of the company. They celebrate their wins. They have their own internal globalization heroes. They hoist them up. They make them really popular. They build that globalization culture. And you might say, hey, I'm just a PM. How can I do that? Well, you can, because you interact with people. You have company communications. You can write articles. You can really trumpet your wins. And I really advise that everybody does that. Get automation in place so that you don't hold up other development initiatives. Learn from other continuous systems, not just linguists. Your job is to be that bridge between development and localization so that localization is enabled. Get help early. Time is never your friend in these things. All right, so I've gone a little over. Most of you have stayed with me. Thank you. I'm going to go through the questions now. Milen, I didn't give you much time to talk, but we were making you come in here after the fact anyway. A couple of things I do suggest following up, looking at the blog. This is an example. Like if you go to this Gremlins thing, that's in our wiki. It describes, sort of the categories of internationalization issues. This is a really good webinar. If you want to go back on our blog, this is sort of the search box URL. You'll see a whole bunch of things. And because you use that search box, I'll tell you a secret. You can get to any Lingoport content without a gate if you just use the search box. All right, so that's us. I'm going to deal with some questions here. Okay, Adam, this is kind of crunched here. Marketed i18n knowledge, not your tools. You have to talk to the universities where developers are trained and never learn about the importance of i18n, but are taught to do stuff like concatenation. Yes, in fact, we actually, Olivier on our team has periodically helped teach class, I think at the University of Washington, and he has materials that help teach internationalization principles, in particular how to handle concatenations in a locale-friendly way. I would say write to me and I will put you together with Olivier, and he can maybe forward you a few slides. Okay, although colleges get those tools for free, graduate developers who demand, developers graduate, they demand that. That's true. And we actually provide Globalizer for free for any student who asks, but it doesn't happen that often. I wish it did. All right. Did you know that some companies do not permit Google Translate, though, due to perceived security issues? Very large online retail. This is true. And it's why we don't narrow anybody down to any one machine translation engine. The other thing is that you may want a, they all have different ways of handling glossaries and translation memory. And we do help leverage that. Like when you also make a correction in our tools, it goes back to the engine so that it doesn't make the same mistake over and over again. We can also integrate that path through your TMS. So your TMS still becomes what I'll call the arbiter. It's still the nexus of how your translation is assigned. So you may send it to machines, and with some TMSs, we can say, hey, this was assigned to a machine. We're going to retranslate this and go through that if you don't want to do it through the QA capabilities. All right. Any other questions? Going once, twice. Okay, a recording will be going out. I'll also wrap up these slides to make them available. Milen, thank you again for joining me. Thank you for those who hung on through a little me talking a little bit too much. And thank you for joining. Milen, do you want to say add anything?
Yeah, no, thank you. And please send us if you have any questions, and we can help you and give you some guidance also with, say, MT selection where there's security. So there's many different ways of doing it, and happy to, help you strategize and implement and help in any way we can.
All right, cool. And some of you said hello from various parts of the world. Hello. And we got a thanks. Love you guys and your tools. We love that. That's beautiful. All right, good. Everybody, take care. I have to think of the next webinar. If you have anything you'd like us to talk about, I'm all ears. I probably need to do a good webinar on like the interfaces between source code and the TMS, since that's so important to so many people. I'm thinking of that as an upcoming project. Take care, everyone. Speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.